1, 5, 6. We have 6 people.
Mr. Costello was in the meeting, I believe.
He was here a second ago.
Okay, oh, there we go.
Yep.
Yep, there's Mike. So we have 7. Okay. All right, we're gonna get going here. Welcome everybody to the latest hybrid edition of our Town of Orono Planning Board meeting. It's Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. First item on our agenda is a roll call. We have a combination this evening. Remotely, we have Krista Switzer, we have Ashley Case, and we have Mike Costello. And in person, we have David Thompson, we have Lisa Buck, we've got John Beckett, and myself, Bill Luck. Next up, we have acceptance of the agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second, Lisa.
I second.
I don't think we have any edits this evening, so any further discussion? Jessica, can you do a roll, please?
Yep. For the acceptance of the agenda, Krista Switzer,
Yes.
Michael Costello,
Yes.
Bill Rock,
Yes.
Dave Thompson.
Yep.
Lisa Buck,
Yes.
John Beckett.
Yes.
Do we need to pull in one of our associate members or?
Ashley, you are a designated voting member this evening. Congratulations.
All right, so Ashley, for the approval of the agenda.
Accept.
Thank you, Ashley.
4.
Very good. And before we get going, I do want to mention, I sent an email to planning board members earlier, just talking about the last meeting. And again, we're developing this with the, obviously the participation with town staff to make these meetings successful, and, you know, developing the hybrid approach and even the in-person approach is just taking a little bit of tweaking as we go. So, you know, the first in-person meeting was a little bit too close for comfort for several of us. And the last meeting we were spread out, which was very nice. I like the distancing. But Mr. Owl there, our speaker and recorder, couldn't pick up all the voices. And I'm hoping, I usually am not the one that has the soft voice. I've never been really accused of doing that, but I do want people to know that to make this work, please speak up. And I know I'm guilty of it as well, but that little unit on the table in front of us all is recording this meeting. So I'm going to ask the applicant as well, again, just speak clearly. I know with masks on, it makes it difficult, but we're trying to make this work. I appreciate the people participating remotely so we can condense a little bit, but just a request and a reminder that we're gonna try it this way, you know, the combination, and see how Jessica is able to hear us when she's trying to develop the minutes. But these meetings are recorded and are for public consumption. So again, it's upon us to speak clearly and for the mic. So thank you. Next up is approval of the minutes. Oh, we did a roll call. Yeah, acceptance of the agenda. Did I do number 2?
You did.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Number 3, approval of the minutes of August 18, 2021. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, and John again. Any discussion, edits? Mr. Bear is here. We do have another planning board member joining us. Mr. Bear is at the front door. So before I turn it over to Krista, I did notice, sorry to have one edit, last and you were perfect, but I did notice that Mr. Thompson's name is spelled incorrectly in the present list of the ball.
I will get that.
And for what it's worth, new business, second paragraph on the bottom. Mr. Rocket, blah, 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 blah. They were in line. I think in line is two words. That's all I have. Any other comments, edits on the minutes?
Page 2, item B, the first word, paragraph, starts with Mr.
Hold
White.
on, slow down, please.
Starts with Mr. White invited Robert Basson, OEDC, to step up to the podium. The next line down, still and being need to be separated.
Okay.
Any other comments?
That's it.
Remote people? You have anything? Very good. I think with those edits, we have a motion, any further discussion? Jessica?
For the approval of the minutes, Mrs. Spencer,
Krista? You made it.
Approve.
Michael Costello,
Approved.
Ashley Case,
Approved.
Ruff,
Approved.
Lisa Buck,
Approved.
John Beckett.
Probe.
That's 7-4.
Thank you. Next up on new business, we have one project before us this evening. It is a preliminary subdivision review for NKSE Investment LLC located on Stillwater Avenue on a lot which butts 115 and 133 Stillwater Avenue, also referred to as tax map 18-0 lot 72-1 in the low density residential district. The application is for a clustered development comprising 6 single-family attached units on a 6.65 acre lot. And if I could have a representative for the project step up to the podium. You heard my spiel on speaking into the owl, as it were, and tell us what you propose.
All right, if I take this off.
No.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Jim Kaiser. I'm here representing the applicant. We're looking to develop 6 units on Stillwater Ave. It was formerly part of the Bagley Greenhouse property on Stillwater Ave, close to Forest Ave. And that 6.5 acre parcel has a net residential density of 7 units. We're only going to install 6 units on the property in 3 duplex structures. One of those structures is currently under construction on the property, as they were the developer was allowed to do that under the ordinances. We've provided what we think is a complete application for the project. We've provided MDOT entrance permits to the site, along with provided full utility design layout on the project, including a planner profile as part of the project sheets. We are asking for 4 waivers, although I understand one of the waivers isn't within your authority, so we will certainly abide by that in the landscape architect design criteria. So we're asking for 3 waivers on the project. One is for the sidewalks along the roadway. It's really a driveway going into the development, and there's no access, no sidewalks along Stillwater Ave. And actually in that area of Stillwater Ave, there's very little to no shoulders on the roadway. So having a sidewalk go that would lead out to Stillwater Ave, really in under DOT standards, it's not really permittable in a way, because they don't want sidewalks leading to nowhere. And that's what that would do. And it also would be leading into a very unsafe conditions. We do have sidewalks in front of all the parking spaces so that there is a sidewalk and access into the units from that sidewalk. The second one is a right of way. It's a little bit of a obscurity, I think, in the form of development. I think they're looking more, the thought process was looking more towards a lot of development where you would have a roadway and a right of way going into it that could potentially be taken over by the town. Where this is all private and maintained by the single ownership, a right of way really doesn't form any function except a couple lines on the plan. It doesn't change the net residential density at all, so it really has no impact on the project except kind of showing the lines. And we just feel that that's kind of not pertinent to what you have in front of you from that standpoint. So that's why we're asking for that. And the last one is on the stormwater calculations and summary table submissions, where we provided the stormwater management report that kind of indicates that this is a very minor development, although stormwater is being handled by sheet flow off of the developed area and into the peripheral wetlands on the property, that it really doesn't add to anything within this. And I understand that the town staff and consultants have also concurred with that aspect. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions the board may have, and look forward to taking the extra step and moving through the process with the board and the town.
Very good. Before we turn it over to questions for you, Mr. Kaiser, we typically have Kyle, planning staff, has provided us with a summary of the application, to add any details from what you just presented. So Kyle, if you please would share with us your summary, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Sure. So, as Mr. Kaiser had stated, one of these single-family attached units is already under construction. A single-family attached by itself in the low-density residential district can be built simply with a building permit, not needing planning board approval, which is why that's taking place. If you're looking at this lot and not utilizing cluster development, there would be enough acreage here to get 2 single-family attached dwellings, so 4 units total, or you get two families. If the lot were split in one. So what the cluster development does is it allows for an additional couple units here. Nothing, so far away what the normal ordinance allows, but a couple extra units. On the condition that a certain amount, in this case 40% of the lot area, is designated as open space. And I believe that area is shown on the second sheet of the plans. Single family attached dwellings are allowed in the low density residential district. They're considered a 2-unit structure each, so it doesn't fall into that multifamily category, which is 3 or more units in a single structure. As the applicant stated, we had some conversations amongst staff with some of the waiver requests, talking with the public works director and town engineer. We generally agree that a sidewalk along the whole access drive in this area doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense in this part of town. So LDR is a transitional district to our rural part of town. It's not in the town's growth area. It's not where we're promoting a lot of higher densities and walkability. In this case, that and leading out to Stillwater Ave in the in its current form, that made some sense. as far as, in the ordinance, there's a requirement that the planning board can ask a developer if the adjacent land is undeveloped to extend a right of way to make a potential future street connection. In this case, there is undeveloped land in back of this parcel. However, since that full sort of back of the lot and extending onto that adjacent lot are fairly wet with a lot of wetlands, and that adjacent undeveloped parcel already has two potential street frontages, one on Kelly Road and one on Stillwater Ave, that it made sense in this case for that not to be a requirement in this instance. The fire department has looked at the access road as well as the town engineer, and they both had no problems with the construction and layout of the road. The fire department was okay with the area next to the garage that's being used for the turnaround. The applicant indicated amongst staff, we talked about the stormwater, and no stormwater management facilities are proposed. It's a relatively flat area, and with the lot being surrounded mostly by wetlands and the impervious area sort of being in the center point of the lot, the town engineer made the recommendation that the applicant's waiver for doing a stormwater analysis and calculations made sense, as the impacts of stormwater runoff off of the property would be limited by the existing natural buffers, the wetlands. There were a couple of conditions in reviewing the plan that staff has recommended, mainly developing maintenance agreements for the private infrastructure, the septic systems, the access road, and the open space. As well, the open space requirement, while the applicant mentioned it was one of their requested waivers, the planning board has the authority to waive subdivision requirements. That's in the land use ordinance. The ordinance gives the board that authority, but it does not give the planning board the authority to waive performance standards. And the cluster development ordinance falls under those performance standards. And therefore, having that kind of landscape architect design landscape plan for the open space would fall in that area, and would be it would be impossible for the board, I think, to waive that if you interpret the ordinance correctly. I think one other piece, potentially missing from the plan is that the cluster development standards do ask for shade tree plantings along a street going into the property. And while in this case, there isn't necessarily a sidewalk being proposed, that could still be something I think that the board requires if they so choose. I think other than that, I think everything else was covered, but happy to answer any questions if the board has it.
Good. Yeah, before we do open it up to questions, I do want to discuss with the board a little history here. The applicant has mentioned and requested waivers on several items, which I'll discuss. But there's a reason, we developed the cluster subdivision. It allows for increased density, but there are standards that go along with that. And I have never been really much of a fan of granting too many waivers. They're already getting a benefit by the cluster subdivision. So again, some of these, perhaps are warranted, but I'm going to start with the sidewalk. This board and Krista and Dave can vouch for this or add their comments. But we've been very consistent over time for all our subdivisions with these type of arrangements requiring subdivisions. Great Brook Heights, Merritt Drive, Forest Hollow, all are roads to nowhere. Okay, so we had this discussion and before most of the current board members joined, but we had reasons for doing that. So that we never can say, you know, what can happen down the road, but we've been around and around on this. It's been a while, so we haven't had many subdivisions, but we've been consistent on that. And I understand the applicant, you mentioned the DOT, but you know, we're not beholden to the DOT here. This is the town's ordinance. This is what we required. Sidewalks are part of the deal. I did see sidewalks in front of the units, that's fine. The thought that came to mind, so what if you have perhaps kids in those units and they're walking out to Stillwater Ave? I understand it's a busy drive. I understand there's no sidewalk on Stillwater Ave, and there probably won't be for a while. But similarly, no sidewalk on Outer Essex. There's no sidewalk on Outer Forest by some of our current subdivisions. So we've been really consistent with that. So I'm not keen on that. That's just because of the way this board has operated over many years. The landscape architect's design, again, even if it wasn't within our purview, that's another one of those items. You're getting the benefit from the cluster subdivision, so deal with the standards. So that's another one. So it doesn't seems like that's a moot point anyways. I do have a difference of opinion too on the right of way. It's not just two lines on a page. This town is pretty much all of the street designs. And if you go up Main Street here, this is a big discussion in our comprehensive plan about providing connectivity between subdivisions and projects like this. This is a little bit different than some, but the cul-de-sacs and other projects that we've looked at, the point is to avoid dead-end streets all over town. So that's the reason for the right-of-way. It might never happen, but you know, we're looking at what's going on in front of us now. But when we're all retired, living off our planning board paychecks in 20 years, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe there's another project nearby, but providing that connectivity option has always been what we've been after. That was in the comp plan. It's still a focus of what we're trying to do, and allowing those connections is important. However, with this case, I do want to bring up that I believe, Kyle, and you can confirm this, that this project, I mean, those wetlands are the headwaters of Johnny Mac Brook. That's where it starts. Johnny Mac Brook was also a really key focal point of our comprehensive plan discussions. So I'm not too keen on necessarily providing a lot of connections or right of ways into Johnny Mac Brook for this particular case. But the comment about, you know, lines on a drawing, there's a reason for that. We required that for Great Brook Heights on that subdivision. We had 3 in a row. We had Shadbush Lane, we had Forest Hollow, and we had Great Brook Heights, bang, bang, bang. And those are probably the last subdivisions we've had. That was a long time ago, but for each one of those, we had discussions about interconnectivity and providing that right of way so that many years down the road, if there's an adjacent project that you can connect those roads and have circulation, there's all kinds of benefits for that. You can read the comp plan and look at the notes if you want to review that.
Bill,
Yeah,
I think Ergo Pines we required it too.
there's lots of examples. And maybe this one is not particularly the right situation, just because there's developed lots on either side. There's the Bagley Greenhouse, and I don't know who owns Ashley Brown. Apparently is the one closer to the roundabout side, but yeah, the lot in the back, Kyle, you mentioned that there's 2 other roadways. That gives you access into that lot. I'm not sure if it serves the purpose for connectivity, and that's what those right of ways all were about. And you know this from your planning background. You just don't want to design dead-end streets, that's just not good design. So I tried to learn something from him when he was here, and I think that was one of his key points. So there's just a little history just before we consider the waivers, but Krista and Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add, but we've been consistent, clearly on sidewalks and some other items, but you have anything to add to that? Dave, I think both of you have been on longer than I have, which is 15 years plus now.
I think that it's important to put the right of way on, because you never know what's gonna happen. I've seen several cases where we required it, and in fact, it's been used for a trail access.
Yeah.
This right of way, if I may say, this right of way is not gonna be town owned. I was gonna ask, I mean, how many of those other examples are town roads? Several of them that I know are town roads. If I was doing a town road, there wouldn't be a debate in my mind. Obviously, that right of ways are very important because that defines the ownership of that roadway. Where this is a single owned property, that road will never be requested to be taken over by the town, and even if it was, I would never expect the town to take it over just because of the way it's formed and designed from that standpoint. So that's a little bit of, I think, a pretty major differential between at least some of those examples and this particular property on hand. So, and I think it's one of the major things that should be considered in the whole process.
Yeah, but we have the ordinance, and we need to follow it. We found out that if we don't follow ordinances, we can end up in court.
Yeah.
You know, you go way back to Peregrine, and that happened. It wasn't very pleasant.
So I can say that the conversation that I had with Roger, the Public Works Director, was we were looking at this similarly to the Webster Point subdivision
Yes.
and Shore Drive, which, reading through those planning reports, seemed like a similar case where it was an access drive privately maintained coming off of Shore Drive, the small stretch of Shore Drive, which was off of the lot. Now, in that case, there is nothing around the lot to extend in the future. But when we looked at the kind of natural conditions of the lot, we sort of envisioned a similar way, like while there was technically land around it, wouldn't necessarily want the road to go through there. In that case of Shore Drive, there wasn't sidewalk on a stretch of that. So that kind of smaller scale, more condo style development around an access drive, we looked at that as precedent more so than some of the subdivisions that you were looking at. Certainly the board is open to discuss that, and if that's what they want to decide, then yeah, I mean, all those points you raised are exactly right. I mean, that's why those standards exist in the ordinance in the first place, is to avoid the situation that we currently have on Main Street, where you have countless dead end streets that aren't connected, and it sends all of the traffic to that one street. But just a little background on where staff had come from.
That's helpful. Yeah, all right, thank you. Yeah, so questions from the board for the applicant?
Can you say more about, I'm curious about where the headwaters for the Johnny Mac, could they be back here? Is that?
Yeah, that whole, the whole Bagley property forms that boundary with Stillwater Ave, and that kind of flows to the north towards Forest Ave. And I think that's more of that extremely large wetland area in there that has, I think, the actual origin of Johnny Mac Brook in it. But all of this kind of drains that way. There's a little bit across the street across Stillwater that comes through a culvert on our property and then circumvents to the south around it and then flows on down. So That's where I think Phil was talking about, that whole area is kind of the headwaters to that area. The wetland to the north and, more towards forest is actually identified, I think, in the shoreline zoning ordinance and is protected with some shoreline zoning around that area also, because of the size of the wetland. And I think there's some open water in that area also, along with the stream that cuts through it.
Thank you.
I have a question on, maybe we'll get to it later on open space.
Yeah.
Why was there a request or a waiver on open space? I mean, apparently we're meeting, or the applicant is meeting the open space requirement of this plan, right?
I think it was just a discrepancy in the area that was listed on the plan versus what you calculated.
Right,
Yeah.
so,
There was a typo on my behalf. It was really, I calculated wrong. I think I'm about 2/10 off or so on that. That was just a sheer
right,
mispunch or a Scribner's error that I just, when I read it backwards or something and typed it in wrong when I was doing the area. That's just a line, no problem with that. We'll get that corrected in the area overall, adjusted for that standpoint. And just to say, I don't have any issues with the conditions that Kyle has in here, as far as the preliminary approval is concerned. They're all what I would say was appropriate for what we've gotten to come back to you for final approval.
yeah, it's just that the other piece to that, there's a waiver request for the landscape architect design. So the open space is shown on the plan, and it, except for that typo, it meets the requirement of the ordinance as far as the amount of dedicated open space. But the ordinance in the cluster development language requires that the open space plan is designed by a landscape architect. And that's the piece that was asking to be waived.
Right, so this was designed by a landscape architect?
No,
Not yet.
No.
no,
it looks like
so
this-
that's.
Just
one of
straight
the-
lines. I don't think a landscape architect would design open space just to be arbitrarily straight line.
You gotta,
I don't buy it.
if I can interject on that, is that if you look at this development, essentially anything that's not occupied by buildings is open space. It's available to use by all the tenants in that area. So essentially, the whole thing is open space. The ordinance requires some delineation of that 40% to comply with the requirements of that ordinance. So that's what we basically delineated out. If it needs to be curved, really no difference. I don't, that makes no difference to me. The landscape architect, as far as the open space design, my interpretation of that is that they would be designing the plantings and some of the, if you had something more formalized, hardscapes, trails, whatever happened to be in there, that would be accomplished by a landscape architect. And I'm not debating, we're talking with our landscape architect, trying to get them on board on it. I don't think there's going to be a big formal plan as far as what happens in the open space, just because it's only 6 units in there. If we were doing something, 3 or 4 times that size, yeah, we might be looking at some walking trails and some other recreational, passive and active recreational activities on it. So really, that's what it is. It doesn't, to me, I don't care if you want curves on it, I'll put curves on it. It really doesn't change that aspect of the open space on it from our consideration.
All right, so the open space is primarily being protected from further development,
Correct,
right?
correct. It
So
can be,
so the rest of these open space on the plan, you could come back here for
well,
at some point.
it's not protected as open space, but there wouldn't be able to be additional development simply because they wouldn't have the acreage to add more units.
The net density calculation for this maxes it out, so
Right, and
even no matter what amount of open space, sorry, Kyle,
No.
what amount of open space we have, we can't put any more units on there. That's by ordinance criteria.
You said,
So-
you said you could have 7, but
We
you
could
don't
have 7, but
Yeah, I don't see how you're gonna squeeze.
we're not gonna put anything on, I mean, from that standpoint, we're basically done. They're not gonna put a single unit in, it just doesn't make,
You're saying that, but in
Efficiency
the
sense.
future, somebody else might want to put one in there. We
well,
have-
and they
we
could,
have to look at
and
that.
and they could, but they'll still meet the ordinance criteria if one more was added. If we changed one to a 3-unit building instead of a 2-unit building, it would still comply with the ordinance, from that standpoint of being 7 units. But it's really not gonna take up much more occupied space on the property. So, that's why I say really anything outside the buildings is usable by all the tenants, so it's really all open, on it. It's not, when you consider a lotted cluster subdivision where you've got smaller lots, you decrease the size of the lots so that you can, more efficiently use your roadway and utilities, then you're taking a credit for what you're taking out of the lots, you're keeping as open space in some area. And that has a little bit more of a differential because it's either owned by an association or somehow it's owned by all the lot owners, or it's gifted off to either the town or some other entity, depending on the size and the appropriation on it. This is not, this is always gonna stay one ownership. And it can't change without coming back to you to make that change. So if there was some kind of change in that, it would always have to come back to you for that kind of a modification. At least that's my interpretation of the ordinance.
That seems reasonable. I think even the line as you put it, you probably even have a hard time. You might be able to squeeze one in off the end, but
Yeah,
like you said, that seems reasonable.
yeah.
Other questions? I just noted one thing you mentioned on the third sheet. You talked about that existing culvert, but I don't know if that was your intent, but the one, again, you're constructing, you must have put that in.
That was put in, one thing I should say is that if anybody's been out there, we did say it in the cover letter, this has been harvested prior to this owner purchasing the property. The Bagleys harvested a lot of their property
Yes.
previously. That was put in by the logging contractor to gain access into the property. It's in extremely poor condition. It's not even in the right spot from that standpoint, so we did call that to be removed.
Yeah,
The
you said
culvert
maybe,
drains onto our properties right here.
yeah, I was just saying, you said maybe reuse, and I was looking at your DOT thing, and it says it's damaged.
Yeah.
I just didn't anticipate that you were putting it there, because you know, the flow through the wetlands is important, so.
It is, and that's actually the low spot. It should have been, when the logging contractor went in there, it should have been out front there.
You're not gonna reuse it for that.
No, probably, no.
Good answer.
My guess is by the time they pull it out, there's not gonna be much left of it.
Can we discuss, again, you understand the points, and again, Kyle mentioned the precedents. Just short drive, just down the street from my house. That one has a shorter sidewalk just for access, and just 2 parking spaces for the public that we got as part of that project. So that is interesting. You know, the right of way off of a private drive, that is a good point, but I do want the board to discuss that. Again, these are, you know, waivers that we're being asked to grant. The stormwater calculations that our town engineers has weighed in, I think that one is a reasonable request. To me, there's not a huge impact. You know,
I just wondered with the Johnny Mac headlands being right there and the fact that we're having more and more rain than we've ever had before.
Yeah.
If that was an issue at all with stormwater management.
It doesn't appear to me, I do this stuff for a living, but you know, I defer to our town engineer, and it is true that this is a relatively smaller project, less than an acre, and those wetlands will suck up a lot of this. So that seemed reasonable to me, just in my opinion, but and we can discuss that more for the sidewalk and right-of-way issues. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. This is a little different than it's a private drive. I understand the sidewalks to nowhere. We've had that discussion a lot over the years. It's just we haven't had a really subdivision in ages. Any thoughts on that? You have an opinion?
On what, Bill?
Sorry, either. the
Okay,
side-
on the sidewalks, we're told it's a private driveway. It's not guaranteed that will always stay private. We've had that discussion before too. And it seems to me that there is an intermediate path here. And that is that when the landscape architect makes the plan of how things are laid out on the landscape, that on one side of the road, there should be space reserved where a sidewalk could be put in if it needs to be later. In other words, it doesn't have to go in now, but we reserve a space for it so that if in 20 years that area becomes much more built up and a sidewalk is needed, or there's a new owner who wants to put a sidewalk in, there's a place to put it rather than foreclosing that possibility.
Good suggestion. Thoughts on that approach? Yes.
Isn't this part of the comprehensive plan? Is this area along Stillwater? It's designated as where the town is going to concentrate their future development.
No,
It's a
so,
different zone. We changed the zoning from F and A or whatever it was.
right, so I think
So,
in 2000.
Well, it just looked like it. I think that I agree with Krista. In addition, there's a good chance there's going to be school children living in these.
That's just a thought I had. But,
And
yeah.
a sidewalk that goes out to Steel Avenue where they get picked up with the bus would be a very definite improvement.
That's just a thought I had. In your discussions and planning stuff, did that come up? Because that was my thought. Is you have 6 units, if there's kids there and, having a space to walk.
Yep, so I mean, in talking with Rob, who, I mean, deals with a lot of our sidewalks and is involved in their, regional transportation planning and as well, I mean, we didn't talk about that specific point. It was more so I think for the scale that they were proposing and with the lack of that type of infrastructure in the area, and it seems like there's not necessarily an eager plan forward, while Main Street and other parts of town, speaking to, where the town wants to focus growth. In 2000, I think 8 or 9, the town did the amendment to the comprehensive plan, focusing on the forest and agriculture district, and sort of rezoned this area to be a transitional area between the growth area, east of the interstate and, the rural area. So it's sort of this in-between area where, you can expect to have some low density growth, but the town's not also encouraging future growth there over sort of the in-town area where it is encouraging, that denser, more compact, walkable area. So I mean, I think it's a valid point and it's up for discussion. But yeah, that was just where staff landed. I think we were generally okay with the waiver request, but ultimately it's up to the board's decision.
Well, I think this is a, let's say, a transition zone.
Correct.
So that means the town would rather have development in the transition zone that would way out on Essex Street,
Sure.
which is far removed from all the services.
Right.
So that's why I think we need to be looking ahead at what's gonna happen or could happen out there. And we make some of these requests, but, you know,
You mentioned support for Krista's like interim steps so that actually there's, you know, space reserved so that that's not either built up or whatever landscape. Would you prefer to have the sidewalk now? And I'm gonna ask the rest of you the same question.
Would the sidewalk be on both sides?
I would assume one side would be, that's typical, but usually we don't ask for both sides, or we haven't.
I think most of them have been one side.
Yeah,
If the applicant said he didn't want the sidewalk going to nowhere, if it was there, it could cut off and fade off into the street, maybe 15 feet before the Stillwater entrance.
there's a bus stop or something like there. Yeah. So again, so Krista proposed an alternate solution here, but again, we're deciding on a waiver request. So if we grant the waiver request, there's no sidewalk. So our decision is whether we want to do that. Ashley, please.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what the environmental cost per to benefit ratio is here, right? So there's a lot of kind of construction materials that go into this. There's also a financial cost to making kind of a sidewalk versus kind of Krista's suggestion to make it kind of a landscaped area that could potentially be a sidewalk in the future. Seems to make a lot of sense to me because, you know, at the point where you really do need the sidewalk, there's space to put it there. But in the interim, you have kind of this natural space, trees, grasses, maybe flowers kind of growing in this space instead. Seems to make a lot of sense kind of in the shorter term.
Okay.
I would add, you know, if we went all the way out, there is that big patch of wetland in there too. So it would create an additional wetland impact for this project and within the town from that standpoint. And that's a huge environmental concern typically for the state.
Very good. Other comments? Thank you, Ashley. Bob, what do you think?
I like the compromise, actually,
Okay.
Krista suggested.
Mike, what do you think?
I'm okay with Krista's suggestion too.
Okay, Mr. Beckett?
I like the compromise idea. Good idea.
And Lisa?
I'm gonna throw one more idea out there, and that is that from a public health standpoint, promoting walking as much as possible is excellent for people's health.
Yeah.
I don't have any evidence to support that if there's a sidewalk, people are more likely to walk on it.
Yeah.
As opposed to a path, a more uneven muddy path or something, but so I would rather have them do the sidewalk sooner rather than later.
Yeah, all valid points. We've talked about walkability. I think about all those things when we review projects. I understand this is a private project, part of it is safety. We've heard from town staff, they compared it to, like Short Drive and the other one you mentioned. That were two. Either way, at the very least, I would like space reserved for this. He mentioned the wetland impact. You throw a 4-foot sidewalk in there, times whatever the scale is, say 50 feet. It's another
20 scale,
another 200 square feet plus of impact, again, on a wetland. So, and again, trying to minimize that. I'm okay with Krista's suggestion. I appreciate that thought, but I like compromises. I think that works well.
What was your suggestion? I didn't.
To actually reserve space so that, just to make sure that there's, when the landscape architect, and then it was a good suggestion that they could reserve space for that. And just to
I'm standing with our sidewalk needs to be built.
I noticed, Mr. Kaiser, that you intend that the other sidewalks is just striped, again, just continuation of the pavement, but you striped it.
Correct.
So.
And that's primarily for snow plowing.
Yeah.
Improvements on it from that standpoint.
Yeah, so again, if Dave, or even Lisa, something like that, if if we extended that sidewalk and then it'll go, probably in the side where the 2 units are, the double units, and extend along that side, maybe toward the wetland. So it could just be a wider section of pavement for a little while with just striping. I kind of assume that you probably extend that. But that's an option too. So just make the road a little bit wider. We've heard wait and just reserve it. Ashley mentioned reserve it. Krista, I think you know what you mentioned. Mike, you said reserve the space. John as well. Lisa would. What would be?
I'm not gonna die on this hill.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm willing to compromise on it. I just, to me, it's really important to make sure people get out and move.
Yeah.
So,
All right. So the waiver, I want to go back to that. So if we make them or request that they reserve space, if we went that route, will that negate the waiver request and we just have them included in the landscape plan?
So I think you would just want to make that an added condition of approval of the preliminary plan, that on the final plan, space is reserved for future. sidewalk.
But it's not, so that negates the waiver.
I've got another question before we,
Yeah, go ahead.
what is the black line that goes through this wetland out here? Is that the culvert? What is? There's a black-
Well, yeah.
That's a culvert.
Pardon?
That's a culvert.
Is that an
A
open
drainage
bottom
pipe?
culvert?
Excuse me?
Is that an open bottom culvert?
No, it's
It should be.
just a round culvert.
We've got wetland on both sides of it, and in order for amphibians and various creatures to get through, it should be an open bottom culvert.
This project doesn't require any, at the current time, doesn't require any DEP permitting. or
I understand
modification.
it, it's just from an
So-
environmental standpoint.
I understand that. I've had the discussion with DOT or DEP.
Specification, and that's not gonna be environmentally very friendly at all. No, never mind. I've been involved with some of this before, and we'll talk to some of the regional biologists and that very strongly recommend open bottoms. And they're available.
I understand
They're
that.
not really available. You have to construct them.
That's a very good point that's Dave's making. Again, for this scale, I'm not sure that we've required that before. The last one that I recall was the extension of Page Place. Because Mohammed Masavi came before us with a project, and that one was farther down in Johnny Mac Brook, much wider stream section. And he did have to put in an open bottom, but that was a wide culvert, a much larger section, the Johnny Mac. But for this one, I'm not sure that we'd be overstepping our bounds to request that, Dave. But I agree with your point, but I'm not sure that the board can really go with. If you can oversize that, again, you got a 15-inch pipe there. And I understand your point, Dave.
I put one in, or supervised putting one in on the Taylor Road a couple of years ago, worked fine.
Yeah.
It's bigger. Obviously. This is a small variant. I don't know which way it's flowing, it's pretty flat right there.
Point taken.
It's actually flowing to the south.
So
Very, very, very slightly.
So right now, it seems like, again, most of the board, most of the feedback we've gotten is to have the landscape architect identify a space for a sidewalk so that we don't lose that opportunity. Is that what I'm hearing? The majority of people? Bob, Ashley, Krista, Mike, John.
That's correct.
All right, so I guess we're gonna settle on that then, and, again, we're gonna this is a preliminary hearing, so we can think about that, but that's what we're gonna move ahead with, so it negates the waiver request. But
We
it becomes a
would be amendable.
condition.
We would be amenable to that.
Next up, the right-of-way issue. Again, town staff looked at Shore Drive, there's really no place to have connectivity, there's really no adjacent projects. I understand Dave's point with a path or a right-of-way. I'm not sure that I want to encourage a whole bunch of development in the headwaters of Johnny Mac, goes back to, some of the comments Lisa was making, so I understand it, but we have required it, I'm not sure that this is the instance, again, maybe die on that hill or whatever phrase you want to use. So what are the thoughts on the right of way? I explained what we've been doing as a board for years, but I'd like people to weigh in on that so we can keep moving. Dave, the right of way,
I think we should grant it because I agree with what you just said, that you don't want a lot of people going in and work with Johnny Mac work anyway.
Okay, Bob, what do you think? Do you understand the point here? A lot of times, so just say Great Brook Heights or Great Brook Drive. We've got a cul-de-sac and then there was I think a Bangor hydro parcel out back. And if somebody ever wanted to punch through a subdivision there, you allot a right of way so that it's reserved, recorded in the registry. So that if you ever wanted to connect two dead-end subdivisions, you'd have a right of way to the edge of the parcel. So we typically require that.
If we don't have a right of way, then that means that area is not accessible, right?
Correct.
Because of Johnny Mac Brook, it seems like it's a good idea not to have the right of way.
It does, when we looked at that undeveloped piece of land next to it, it's a large piece of land that one day could be developed.
Yeah.
But that area, directly in back of this lot that's where the largest concentration of wetlands is. So it does seem fairly likely that if that parcel was developed even substantially in the future, it probably wouldn't be in the area directly in back of this lot.
There's a lot of wetlands back there, and I'm not sure that we want to punch a road.
Where is that area, Kyle?
Sure, like where we're talking about, based on.
So directly on the right side of the plan, so sort of the southeast, I guess, side of the line. So, if you imagine kind of Kelly Road going horizontally and Stillwater, this way, it's, the lots here, it's the piece of land like in this area here, sort of sandwiched between Kelly Road and Stillwater Ave. And that's, I want to say it's like a 40-acre piece of land that could certainly be developed one day. But the part of that lot directly behind this area, I mean, you can see the wetlands towards the rear of this lot that extends into that neighboring lot fairly significantly. Yeah.
All right, Krista, what is your opinion on the right of way?
Well, I guess ordinarily I would be in favor of it, but it sounds like I don't have a complete picture in my mind of, the exact layout of the land. But with all the wetlands around, this may not be a place where we want to encourage development or where it's even likely to happen. So a right of way, we would be making a point that we always want a right of way, but I don't think it would have practical impact.
Thank you. Ashley?
I mean, again, I haven't seen the site in person, but I would certainly want to kind of preserve and protect as much wetland as possible. And if a right of way would kind of disturb that or even kind of preclude you from using it, I don't understand, kind of what the purpose of the right of way would be if you couldn't use it.
Thank you. Mike?
I checked out the site. I can't see where a right of way would go anywhere. It just ends in wetlands back there.
Okay. No?
I think Michael's correct, I agree.
Okay. Lisa?
So I just have a question about this 40-acre parcel.
Yeah.
That it looks to me like that's sitting here.
Yeah.
Like down here, right?
Yeah, right.
No,
No, it's toward the back.
Toward the back.
That's the right side of the
it's
page.
this one.
Yeah.
SSR.
Oh,
LLC.
that's-
Owns it. This is a single family house lot to the south.
okay.
And then it's part of the Bagley estate to the north, which is one lot that they've sold out after the celery estate.
The greenhouse in that house, I think that's currently. for
Yeah,
sale.
I guess my question is, and I don't have a, you know, I'm not gonna die on this hill either, but my
Mhm.
question is, if it's possible to build in that 40 acres, would we want someday to be able to say, hey, there should be able to be a road connecting this? Because if somebody can build on that lot,
Yeah,
then I think connectivity becomes more important. So and I don't know the answer, I don't, you know, just more asking a question. If it's a buildable lot, is there a way around this so that we can protect the idea of having a right of way down the road,
and you look
so
at
to
the,
speak?
yeah, part of it, I was looking at the scale of it, so, you know, Great Brook Heights, it's a really long road, house lots all the way around it, and you can see where connecting a road going through that. Just imagine if you're, and again, I'm just thinking ahead here now, as I think about this, if you're living in one of those units, extending a road and having a lot of traffic go through this, I'm not sure that that's the scale or that probably the right application for this instance, and I think we've got to look at all these pretty carefully. Again, we haven't had one in a while, so, but I think the idea of connectivity is really good. I agreed with that whole philosophy when we were going through the comp plan exercise. But I also understand I want to minimize impacts to Johnny Mac Brook. And those wetlands are quite important, in my opinion. Well, it seems like, I'm just listening to the majority, it seems like we will move ahead with that waiver request. Thank you for the discussion. I do want to remind the board, not to belabor it, but a lot of you are new. Preliminary plan discussions and what we're doing this evening, and again, even John, I'm not sure, have you reviewed the subdivision? You've been on here a while, but we haven't had one in a while, so the preliminary plan, usually in my mind, you're ironing out all the big ticket items,
Yes.
really, so that, you know, kind of when we get to final, you know, they're addressing what we've talked about today, but, you know, this is where our opportunity to really hash out, you know, our larger concerns.
Yeah, great.
You know, that makes, well, it's always made sense to me, you know, we get two cracks at this, so again, that's what we're trying to do here. Make sure we get it right so that they come back to us with a more polished plan. We'll see the landscape architect, we'll see that information next time. He'll tidy up all, you know, the other things that staff have identified. And typo that you might want to know, George Bagley versus Shiapka or whatever. So, you know, plan reference.
Yep.
There you go. Other than that, I didn't have a lot of other concerns. Staff provided a really thorough memo. So any other, you know, big ticket, small ticket items that people have noticed that, you know, we've heard from town engineer that stormwater is okay, and I happen to agree with that assessment. We've heard from the fire department that they can maneuver their vehicles. They're gonna turn around in the driveway by the garage. I think that was in the DOT submittal, but that's where they're gonna back in. So they've got ample space. They've signed off on that. Private well and septic, so we don't have a lot of issues there. It's a screened enclosure for solid waste. I can't really think of any other issues that I've caught.
Krista had a question.
Krista, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, I just, am I muted? No. Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. On the landscape plan, we don't have one, so we can't look at it. But I'm hoping that in addition to addressing the trees along the road, that it will include some amenity planting around the buildings. Doesn't have to be a lot, but some thought to that. And probably there needs to be some area of mowed vegetation so that one can move around outside a bit without immediately interacting with all the ticks. So I'm, kind of hoping that when we see that landscape plan, those things will be considered.
Like, yeah, roughing out yards and. Yeah. Native plantings are preferred by this board. So just
We try to keep it that way.
be prepared, yep. Other comments? All right, so we're voting, we do need to vote on waiver request tonight.
Perfect.
Correct, and right now we have two of them. We're talking about a waiver of the stormwater submission and the right of way. The other one is moot because we can't affect the landscape. They're already going that way. And because we're asking a landscape architect, whoever to, to include the sidewalk and make sure that that is preserved for future use, that waiver request goes away. So can I get a motion, please?
I move that we waive the need for a right of way. Is that what you want me to say?
And the stormwater.
And I can do it both at the same way, okay, and the stormwater
So
calculation, area.
I'll second it.
very good, thank you, Mike.
Thank you,
Yeah, the two, to clarify, the right of way on
yeah.
unloaded multifamily development and the stormwater calculations and summary table submissions. So we have a motion, we have a second, we have further discussion. Jessica,
Yeah, to waive the stormwater and right of way for the proposed project, Krista Schwenzer,
Yes,
Michael Costello,
Yes,
Ashley Case,
Yes.
Bill Rock,
yes,
David Thompson,
Abstain?
Lisa Buck,
Yes,
John Beckett.
Yes.
That's 6-4 with one abstaining.
thank you. And this is a public hearing. We've had all of our internal discussions. And thank you if anybody has waited online as we sort through the issues, but that's an important step. Open up the public hearing. Belle, do we have anybody online?
We do, but I don't have anybody with a hand raised to comment yet.
Okay, Kyle, you mentioned, did we receive?
I did get one email commenting on this, so I
Yeah.
can read that out.
You can read it.
Or I can summarize it
Awesome.
either way.
Thank you.
So this is from Scott Thomas, who says, I am writing as a budding property owner and in strong opposition of the proposal to build what I consider to be high density multifamily housing in that location. I was very surprised to see a multifamily structure being built to the left of the Bagley home occupation greenhouse eyesore. It was disturbing that I completely missed zoning changes that now obviously must allow that use. Directly across the road from this proposed development is a significant vernal pool, culvert, and watershed. This proposed development will obviously severely impact drainage for all parties on the north side of Stillwater Ave. Perhaps past land use changes now allow for one duplex, but obviously should not allow 3 duplexes in that swamp. I am strongly opposed. So just to clarify some of the points, this isn't multifamily housing. The density level, the cluster development in the low density district allows for 2 units per acre. The applicant subtracted away the undevelopable land from the wetlands and you're left with the remaining area of land on the parcel. You times that by the 2 units per acre that are allowed as part of the cluster development, and that's where you arrive at the number of allowed units. Single family attached units are allowed as a land use in this district. You can actually have up to 4 connected, even though here we just have 2.
The drainage,
As
it
far-
drains to the south.
Right,
So
the drainage, right,
So it wouldn't, it shouldn't impact anything to the north.
correct. And our mapping does show across the street on those sort of 2 properties to the west, what could be a vernal pool. I don't think in our GIS table, it seems inconclusive as to whether it is or isn't. But that the standards for, you can speak to this too, I guess, for impacts with a vernal pool is that in that 250-foot kind of radius around the pool, can impact more than 25% of the area, and really the only piece here, one, the vernal pool is not on this project site in question,
Yeah.
and 2, the majority of that 250-foot radius would still be undeveloped. It would just be that 24-foot really access road that would go through that piece.
Is this even something, I mean, if that comment, the vernal pool is on another property,
Right, I mean, our ordinance language is pretty specific. It says vernal pools on the site, so that it wouldn't be something.
but I think we have discussed, obviously, again, with the sidewalk discussion, right-of-way discussion, we're obviously aware that, this is an important headwater area, and we're trying to do the best job we can to try to minimize impact, so thank you for that comment. Bell, anybody on the line? Hands raised?
Nope, sorry, I couldn't get unmuted. Nobody with their hand raised.
I'm gonna close the public hearing then. Boom. Last bit of discussion from the board. Appreciate all the input tonight. All right, I guess I'm ready for a motion. Again, this is gonna come back before us, most likely in a month or so.
I would hope so.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, so I would, again, the recommendations, it's been a while, so I'm rusty on the subdivision, but recommendations would be in the final, or are we recommending these for preliminary approval?
So I think these were things, really recommendations that staff would look to have for the
The
final.
final, that's what I, so tonight we're just,
There's no
voting.
findings of that, but
no.
an approval of the preliminary plan with the.
So with that, so we need a motion. Whichever way we can phrase that with the conditions that Kyle mentioned in his summary. What is the wetland impact from this project?
Just under 1/10 of an acre. We agree with 500.
Just so Kyle, you had in your recommendations, the copies of any main DEP permits if issued. I was wondering, are you expecting any main DEP permits?
Just a permit by rule for stormwater,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
and we'll file that before we come back, so I'm hoping that the 14 days will elapse
Yeah.
before we get the final, so that with the date of receipt, the board will know that DEP has had no comments on it.
Yeah, thank you. All right, is anybody ready to take on a motion?
I'll do it. I move we approve the preliminary subdivision review for Stillwater Ave tax map 18-0 lot 72-1, which is zoned a low density residential zone. Do I have to say area and ordinance or all that? No.
No.
Okay, with the following recommendations. Number one, that documents be provided as part of the final plan submission to include provisions for maintaining all private infrastructure, including reserved open space, the access road, and wastewater disposal systems.
Just a quick question. So the recommendations were for final, the issues, are we going to focus on the bullets? Just above the recommendations, is that?
So I compiled most of those into
Got it.
the
I just wanted to
yeah, it's sort of duplicate information.
keep rolling.
Okay, number two, that copies of any main DEP permits, if issued as of the date of final plan review, be provided to the planning board, or if not issued, that copies of the applications be provided. Number three, that the open space requirement be amended on the plan to show the required amount, and that at least the required amount be represented on the plan. And four, that a landscape plan be provided detailing the existing conditions of the proposed open space area and show adequate shade trees along the proposed access drive meeting the standard for cluster developments.
And include the reservation on the plan for the future sidewalk.
Okay, that plan should also include room for a sidewalk in the future. And
I think that's good.
is that good? Do I need to say anything about that?
Landscaping around the buildings.
I knew there was something, that's what I was
Thank you,
looking at.
Krista. You're
And
good.
landscaping around the buildings, and did you want to say something about the lawns for tick management or something? No,
I think we made our point.
Okay.
He understands what we got.
Alright. all right.
Thank you. We have a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Beckett. Further discussion? Jessica,
Just to clarify, this is for approval of the preliminary subdivision
that
plan.
is correct.
All right, so for approval of the preliminary subdivision plan. Krista Switzer,
Yes,
Mike Costello,
Yes,
Ashley Case,
Yes.
Phil Ruff,
Yes.
Dave Thompson,
Yeah.
Lisa Buck,
Yes,
John Beckett.
Yes.
That's 7-4.
Good, thank you, Jessica. Next up, we have other new business.
One question, I think now at final, when we do the site plan, I think technically we need a site plan approval also on it. Would that be at final also?
I don't think there's technically a.
Technically, no.
Right.
Okay.
I think some of those review criteria.
I know they overlap and stuff like that. I know just some towns
Yeah.
technically give the two, just so it goes on record as, both of them, because you do kind of comply with both requirements of the,
Right.
because under the site plan, if we did this without subdivision,
Yeah,
we would need a site.
right. I think if it included all of if any multifamily structures or anything like that, but I think in this case where the uses are permitted, it's just the cluster development that really triggers the.
Okay. I didn't want to let it go by the wayside and make sure we covered everything we needed to. Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening.
All right, other new business, none, discussion. Kyle, what do you have on tap? Probably this one next.
Right, so most likely we would be reviewing the final plan for this project. As well, with council, we've been working on some minor amendments to the marijuana ordinance. So that's sort of been in effect for a little while now. Been talking to some applicants about, proposed projects and, we've had a moratorium with council to talk about the actual feasibility of having those retail stores on Park Street where they were originally zoned and how there's some setback issues there with sensitive uses. So there's a couple of minor changes to that that would need to be looked at and have a public hearing. And then the university has just submitted a site plan application for some renovations of a couple campus buildings to be used as a hotel space. Yeah, boutique hotels. So staff, we just got that in 2 days ago, so we'll review in the next couple of weeks and it should be ready to go for review at the October meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, we have adjournment.
So
Motion.
Second.
So ahead of you.
There we go. Discussion. All those in favor, Jessica?
Who was my second? Was that you, John?
John Beckett. Good, reliable second.
All right, for adjournment of the September meeting, Krista Switzer,
Yes.
Costello,
Yes.
Yes.
Bill Rock,
Yes.
Dave Thompson,
Yep.
Lisa Buck,
yes.
John Beckett.
Yes.
That's 7-4. Good, everybody.
Have a good evening, everyone. See you in a month. Less than a month.